This is Tony T here from TonySpace.com with our college football pick show here for Saturday, November 8th. We're going to have all Saturday's picks, FBS versus FBS competition here. Picks from every game. For more free pick videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Lots of free picks on our channel delivered by myself, as well as a team of cappers here at TonySpace.com, making it a great channel to subscribe to. Hit us up with that like, that thumbs up. We greatly appreciate it. Then visit our site, TonySpace.com. We're a multi-capper site showcasing top performers in our industry. Click the links to the hot cappers, get signed up to long-term passes. Guys like Sean Higgs up there, DeAndre, Brian has been red hot, Kevin, Ron Crawford, guys on top of our leaderboards. All these guys you know from our live shows as well as our YouTube videos. Latest premium picks here, send the page with best bets and more. We're locked and loaded for this card here on Saturday. And our promo code TonyT at checkout will knock off that 15%. The link's in the description to get signed up. So let's go ahead. Let's get this one underway. Temple fell to 5-4 after a 45-14 home defeat to East Carolina. The Owls were limited through the air and rushed for 82 yards for 2.7 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 584 yards to the Pirates by poorly defending the run and pass. Evan Simon completed 11 of 20 for 80 yards with a pick. Army now 4-4 after a 20-17 road win at Air Force. Midshipmen were efficient in their limited throws and rushed for 193 yards for 4.3 yards a carry. They allowed 3.5 yards per rush with 161 passing yards for 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Kel Helms in the game, 5 of 9 passing for 102 yards and a touchdown. He rushed for 98 yards and a score. The Owls on the road in conference are putting up 32 points per game with good work at the quarterback position. They're allowing 25 points per game on the road in conference. Army at home in conference put up 31 points per game with 346 yards rushing for 5.2 yards per pass per carry. Per carry there. On defense at home in the AAC, the Midshipmen are allowing 68% completion rate. Temple 7-3 to the over on the road in conference. Army 9-6 the over at home. Pick here Temple and Army over 46.5. Colorado and West Virginia going off on Saturday. We've got Colorado falling to 3-6 after a 52-17 home defeat to Arizona. The Buffs had some movement in the passing game and rushed for 129 yards for 3.1 yards a carry. Julian Lewis hit 9 of 17 for 121 yards and a touchdown. The true freshman gets the start due to ineffectiveness from the starter and the backup. West Virginia now 3-6 with a 45-35 road win at Houston. Mountaineers rushed for 246 yards for 4.6 yards a carry. With limited work in the passing game, they limited the Cougars' ground attack and allowed 318 yards passing for 8.8 yards per pass attempt. Scotty Fox here, 13 of 22 passes for 157 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 65 yards and 2 scores. The Buffs have lost and failed to cover all 3 road games. Colorado on the road allowing 36 points per game with 5.5 yards per rush, 7.4 yards per pass attempt. Their offense on the road rushing for 2.7 yards a carry with 53% completion rate. WVU at home rushing for 4.5 yards a carry with 68% completion rate and defending the run well. Colorado 0-3 to the spread on the road as an underdog of 3.5 to 10 points. WVU 6-2 the spread as home favorite. Pick here West Virginia -6. Indiana and Penn State going off on Saturday. We've got Indiana here now 9-0 after a 55-10 road win at Maryland. Hoosiers had good movement in the passing game and rushed for 367 yards for 7 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Terrapins to 37 rushing yards for 256 yards passing for 7.7 yards per pass attempt. Fernando Mendoza, 14 of 21 passing for 201 yards with a touchdown and pick. Penn State now 3-5 after a 38-14 road win at Ohio State. The Lions had a poor passing performance and rushed for 55 yards in the game. They allowed 480 yards to the Buckeyes by poorly defending the run and pass. Ethan Gruckmeyer, 19 of 28 passes for 145 yards and a pick. 5 straight defeats for the Lions. Indiana in conference play putting up 44 points per game with 5.1 yards per rush and great work in the passing game. On defense against the Big Ten, they're allowing 12.3 points per game with excellent work defending the run and pass. Penn State against the conference struggling in the passing game and on defense. They allow the Big Ten foes 5 yards per rush with 73% completion rate. Hoosiers 4-1 to the spread as the road favorite. Penn State 1-5 to the spread at home, facing teams that allow 17 points per game or fewer. Pick here Indiana -14.5. SMU and Boston College going off here on Saturday. We got SMU now 6-3 after their 26-20 home overtime victory against Miami. The Mustangs rushed for only 23 yards, but were good in the passing game. They allowed 4 yards per rush to the Hurricanes with 274 yards passing for 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Kevin Jennings in the game, 29-44 for 265 yards with a touchdown. Boston College sits at 1-8 with a 25-10 home defeat to Notre Dame. The Eagles had 12 rushing yards, but had movement in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 458 yards to the Fighting Irish, with poor work against the pass and run. Grayson James here, 25-37 passes for 240 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. SMU has failed to cover 3 of 4 on the road. On the road, they're struggling with quarterback accuracy and surrendered 297 yards passing for 7.6 yards per pass attempt. They have been poor in conference play and converting at third downs. BC has defended the run well at home and throwing for 253 yards with 64% completion rate. SMU 4-8 to the spread as a road favorite. We'll take Boston College here at plus 10.5. Georgia and Mississippi State for Saturday. All right, we've got Georgia now 7-1 after a 24-20 road win at Florida. The Bulldogs had movement in the passing game and rushed for 138 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. Offensively, they held the Gators to 3.6 yards per rush with 166 yards passing for 6.9 yards per pass attempt. Gunnar Stockton here, 20-29 passes for 203 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Mississippi State sits at 5-4 after their 38-35 road win at Arkansas. The Bulldogs had good movement through the air and rushed for 106 yards for 2.8 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Razorbacks' passing game, allowed 239 yards rushing for 5.2 yards per pass attempt. Blake Shapen here, 16-28 passes for 232 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Mississippi State has covered 9 of 10 dating back to last year. Georgia on the road has 2 wins by 4 points or fewer in their 3 games. The Bulldogs offensively in conference on the road rushing for 3.3 yards a carry and allowing 254 yards passing for 7.6 yards per pass attempt. Bulldogs at home in conference getting really good quarterback play and limiting opponents on the ground. Georgia 3-6 to the spread as a road favorite. So we'll take Mississippi State here plus the 8. BYU and Texas Tech. This one here for Saturday. BYU now 8-0 after their 41-27 road win at Iowa State. The Cougars had great quarterback performance and rushed for 103 yards for 3.7 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 495 yards with poor work in the run and pass defense. Bear Bachmeier, 22 of 35 passes for 307 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed the game for 49 yards and a score. Texas Tech now 8-1 after a 43-20 road win at Kansas State. The Red Raiders had really good movement in the passing game and rushed for 187 yards for 4.3 yards a carry. The Red Raiders rushed for 4.2 yards per rush with 199 yards passing for 6 yards per pass attempt. Baron Morton in the game, 21-32 passing for 249 yards and 2 touchdowns with a pick in there. BYU on the road in the Big 12 rushing for 4.9 yards a carry and getting good quarterback play. Texas Tech at home in conference put up 42 points per game, nearly 6 yards per rush, and great work in the passing game. Cougars 8-3 to the over as a underdog. The Red Raiders are 10-5 to the over as a home favorite. Pick here BYU and Texas Tech over 52.5. James Madison and Marshall for Saturday. James Madison now 7-1 after a 52-20 road win at Texas State. The Dukes were outstanding in the passing game and rushed for 247 yards for 6 yards per carry. On defense, they held the Bobcats at 3 yards per rush with 230 yards passing for 6.6 yards per pass attempt. Lonzo Barnett here, 12 of 18 passes for 264 yards with 4 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 98 yards and a score. Marshall sits 4-4 with a 44-27 road defeat to Coastal Carolina. The Thunder and Herd were poor in the passing game and rushed for 279 yards for 6.2 yards per carry. On defense, they allowed 4.8 yards per run with 196 yards passing for 9.3 yards per pass attempt. Carlos Del Rio Wilson, 21 of 36 passing for 153 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. He rushed for 74 yards. Thunder and Herd 5-0 to the over in their past 5 games. Marshall at home in the Sun Belt has put up 44 points per game. with great quarterback play. Their pass defense at home in conference is bad, as they allow 335 yards passing for nearly 11 yards per pass attempt. James Madison on the road in conference put up 33 points per game with 5.7 yards per run, 8.2 yards per pass attempt. JMU has gone over in 2 straight. Pick here James Madison, Marshall over 55. Southern Miss and Arkansas State for Saturday. Southern Miss is 6-2 after a 49-21 home victory against UL Monroe. Golden Eagles did good work in the passing game and rushed for 197 yards for 5.2 yards a carry. Defensively, they stuffed the UL Monroe passing game and allowed 209 yards rushing for 5.2 yards a carry. Braylon Braxton, 18-23, passing for 248 yards and 4 touchdowns. Arkansas State 5-4 with their 23-10 road win at Troy. Red Wolves had movement in their passing game, but rushed for only 50 yards. On defense, they held the Trojans to 21 yards rushed with 166 yards passing for 4.9 yards per pass attempt. Jalen Raynor in the game, 21 of 29 passes for 247 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's 4 straight wins and covers for the Red Wolves. They have won both home games in the Sun Belt. Arkansas State at home here against the conference rushed for over 5 yards a carry, and they're completing 71% of their passes. Southern Miss 4-10 the spread on the road. We'll take Arkansas State here at plus 4.5. Bowling Green and Eastern Michigan for Saturday. Bowling Green now 3-6 after a 28-3 home defeat to Buffalo. The Falcons had really poor pass performance and rushed for 116 yards for 2.6 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Bulls' passing game, allowed 146 yards rushing for 5.5 yards a carry. Drew Pine, 7 of 16 passes for 52 yards. Eastern Michigan 2-7 with their 28-21 home defeat to Ohio. The Eagles had good movement through the air and rushed for 112 yards for 4.5 yards a carry. They allowed 3.8 yards per rush in the game with 315 yards passing for 10.9 yards per pass attempt. Noah Kim here, 21 of 30 passing for 259 yards and 2 touchdowns. Falcons 0-4 on the road. They're averaging just 15 points per game against a conference with poor play at quarterback. EMU is getting better play against the conference at the quarterback position. They have defended well at home against the MAC. Pick here Eastern Michigan -2. Ohio State and Purdue for Saturday. Ohio State 8-0 after a 38-14 home victory against Penn State. The Buckeyes had great passing performance and rushed for 164 yards for 5.1 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Nittany Lions to 55 rushing yards, 145 yards passing for 5 yards per pass attempt. Julian Sayin, 20 of 23 passes for 316 yards and 4 touchdowns. Purdue fell to 2-7 after a 21-16 road defeat at Michigan. Boilermakers were poor throwing the football and rushed for 138 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. Defensively, they limited the Wolverines through the air and allowed 253 yards rushed for 6.5 yards a carry. 6.5 yards a carry, that's correct. Ryan Brown, 19-24 passing, 133 yards and a touchdown. In this one, Purdue at home against the conference. They outrun the football for 5.2 yards a carry. They have movement in the passing game. They do defend the run well at home against the Big Ten. Ohio State offensively against the conference rushed for 3.7 yards a carry and averaging 31 points per game. 3 of their past 4 losses have been by 1 possession. That is Purdue. This line is inflated. I mean, the books, listen, they're losing with bettors taking Ohio State. I think they've inflated the number a little too much. They've been losing too much with Ohio State bettors. So I think they've inflated this number just a bit. We'll take Purdue here, plus 29.5. Missouri State now 5-3 after a 28-21 home victory against FIU. The Bears had slight movement in the passing game and rushed for 206 yards for 5.6 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Panthers through the air and allowed 115 yards rushing for 3.3 yards a carry. Jacob Clark in the game, 16-27 passes for 163 yards with 2 touchdowns. Liberty now 4-4 with a 59-30 home victory against Delaware. The Flames gained 561 yards with strong running and passing. On defense, they held the Blue Hens to 3 yards per rush with 344 yards passing for 7 yards per pass attempt. Ethan Vasco in the game, 14 to 20 passing for 221 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 31 yards of score. Missouri State has 3 straight road wins. Liberty has had bad home defeats Madison. The Bears on the road in conference rushing for 4.7 yards a carry and limits opponents in the run game. Liberty at home in conference is allowing 293 yards passing for 6.8 yards per pass attempt. Pick here Missouri State here plus the 8. UAB and Rice, this one for Saturday. We got UAB now 3-5 after a 38-19 road defeat to UConn. The Blazers were inefficient in the passing game, but gave up 5 sacks. They rushed for 154 yards for 4.5 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Huskies on the ground and allowed 267 yards passing for 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Ryder Burton in the game, 21-30 for 209 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Rice now 4-5 with a 38-14 home defeat to Memphis. The Owls were limited in the passing game and rushed for 112 yards for 2.4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush to the Tigers with 225 yards passing for 9.8 yards per pass attempt. Chase Jakes in the game, 11 of 16 passes for 100 yards with a touchdown and a pick. UAB has lost every road game. Rice has a notable home win against an improving UConn team. The Blazers' defense on the road in the conference gave up nearly 5 yards a carry with 10.3 yards per pass attempt. Rice at home is getting accurate quarterback play and limits teams to 3.5 yards per rush. UAB 1-5 the spread on the road against losing teams. Pick here Rice minus 2.5. Maryland and Rutgers for Saturday. Maryland found a 4-4 with a 55-10 home defeat to Indiana. The Terrapins had movement in the passing game and rushed for 37 yards. On defense, they allowed 588 yards to the Hoosiers by poorly defending the run and pass. Malik Washington completed 16-31 passing for 242 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. Rutgers found a 4-5 with a 35-13 road defeat to Illinois. The Scarlet Knights rushed for 2.2 yards a carry and were inefficient in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 445 yards to the final line by poorly defending the run and pass. Ethan Kalamanis, 25-45 pass for 203 yards with a touchdown. Maryland fired their head coach right after that loss. It is 4 straight losses for the Terrapins. Rutgers has a home losses here to Oregon and Iowa. Maryland offensively on the road in conference is getting really poor quarterback play. Rutgers' home conference numbers are poor, but Maryland is a major step down in class from Iowa and Oregon. Pick here Rutgers at a pickup. Jacksonville State and UTEP going off here on Wednesday. Jacksonville State on Saturday's game. Conference USA sometimes plays those midweek games, but this one is on Saturday. Jacksonville State now 5-3 after a 24-21 road win at Middle Tennessee State. The Gamecocks were efficient in the passing game and rushed for 143 yards for 2.9 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Blue Raiders to 3.8 yards per rush with 235 yards passing for 5.2 yards per pass attempt. King Creel in the game, 13 of 19 passes for 139 yards with a touchdown. He only rushed for 1.9 yards a carry. UTEP 2-6 after a 33-20 road defeat to Kennesaw State. The Miners were inefficient through the air and rushed for 135 yards for 3.1 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Owls through the air and rushed for 150 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. Skylar Locklear in the game, 14 of 29 passes for 160 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 77 yards. Jacksonville State has won 2 straight on the road. UTEP has lost 3 straight at home. The Gamecocks have defended well on the road against the conference. The quarterback position on the road against Conference USA, completing 71% with 10.2 yards per pass attempt. UTEP at home in conference put up 9.5 points a game, getting really poor play in the run and passing game. Gamecocks 4-2 the spread on the road, facing teams with a 250 or lower win percentage. UTEP 0-5 to the spread at home when lined at +3 to -3. Pick here Jacksonville State -1. FIU at Middle Tennessee State. This one for action on Saturday. FIU found a 3-5 with a 28-21 road defeat at Missouri State. The Panthers had movement in the passing game and rushed for 115 yards for 3.3 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Bears through the air and allowed 206 yards rushing for 5.6 yards a carry. Keon Jenkins here, 15 of 24 passes for 147 yards with 2 touchdowns. Middle Tennessee State now 1-7 after a 24-21 home defeat to Jacksonville State. Blue Raiders were inefficient in the passing game. They rushed for 84 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 2.9 yards per rush with 215 yards passing for 10.2 yards per pass attempt. Nicholas Fatadio, 23 of 45 passes for 235 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Middle Tennessee State has lost every home game. FIU has a road win at Western Kentucky. FIU in their conference road games running for nearly 5 yards a carry and defended the pass well. They are allowing 17 points per game against Conference USA on the road. Middle Tennessee State at home conference is inefficient in the passing game, allowing 247 yards passing for 9.5 yards per pass attempt. MTSU 5-11 the spread at home. Pick your FIU -1. Tulsa and FAU, this one for Saturday. Tulsa fell to 2-6 after a 38-37 home defeat to Temple. The Golden Hurricane had good passing performance and rushed for 140 yards for 3.2 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 5.3 yards per rush with 267 yards passing for 7.6 yards per pass attempt. Baylor Hayes completed 19 of 31 passing for 296 yards for 3 touchdowns. FAU 3-5 with a 42-32 road defeat to Navy. The Owls threw at high volume and rushed for 69 yards for under 3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 397 yards rushing to the midshipmen for 7.1 yards per carry. Caden Feldkamp, 25 of 41 passing for 299 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Tulsa in their road AAC games rushed for 3.3 yards a carry and they're getting poor quarterback play. They allow AAC opponents on the road 39 points per game with 5 yards per rush and 8.1 yards per pass attempt. FAU at home posting 40 points per game behind good quarterback play. And Tulsa 1-5 on the road against the AAC. We'll take FAU here at -3.5. Louisiana Tech and Delaware. This one for action on Saturday. Louisiana Tech now 5-3 after a 55-14 home victory against Sam Houston State. The Bulldogs were efficient through the air and rushed for 425 yards for 10.9 yards per pass attempt. They allowed 5.1 yards per pass to the Bearcats with 296 yards rushing for 9 yards per carry. Blake Baker in the game, 17 of 21 passing for 221 yards with a touchdown and a pick. He rushed for 42 yards and a score. Delaware sits at 4-4 after their 59-30 road defeat at Liberty. The Blue Hens were held to under 3 yards a carry and had movement in the passing game. They allowed 561 yards to the Flames by performing poorly against the run and pass. Nick Minashushi, 29 of 49 passes for 244 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 37 yards and a score. Delaware has been competitive at home. Louisiana Tech on the road is rushed for 2.8 yards a carry, getting poor quarterback play. They averaged 18.5 points per game on the road against Conference USA. Delaware at home in home conference games put up 30 points per game, getting good play in the passing game. Pick your Delaware +5.5. Charlotte and East Carolina for Saturday. Charlotte now 1-7 after a 54-20 home defeat to North Texas. The 49ers had good performance in the passing game and rushed for 104 yards for 3.9 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 5 yards per rush in the game with 608 yards passing for 12.4 yards per pass attempt. Grayson Loftus, 20 of 36 passing for 295 yards with 2 touchdowns. East Carolina 5-3 with their 45-14 road win at Temple. The Pirates gained 614 yards with good performance on the ground and air. On defense, they limited the Owls to 2.7 yards per carry with 151 yards passing for 6 yards per pass attempt. Kane Hauser here, 19 of 24 passing for 256 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Charlotte on the road in conference play gave 39 points per game with 5.6 yards per rush and 6.7 yards per pass attempt. On offense, in conference, 49ers are poor in the ground and at quarterback position. ECU at home conference play putting up 4.3 yards a carry with 9.2 yards per pass attempt. They defend the pass well at home against the AAC. ECU 3-1 of the spread at home, facing teams that allow 31 points per game or greater. Pick your East Carolina here, minus 28.5. Iowa State and TCU for Saturday. Iowa State now 5-4 after their 24-19 home defeat to Arizona State. The Cyclones had a poor passing game and rushed for 150 yards for 4.7 yards a carry. Defensively, they limited the Sun Devils through the air, but allowed 290 yards rushing for 6.3 yards a carry. Rocco Beck, 18 of 36 passes for 186 yards with a touchdown and pick. TCU 6-2 after a 23-17 road win at West Virginia. The Horned Frogs had movement in the passing game and rushed for 2.9 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Mountaineers to 41 rushing yards, but 301 yards passing for 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Josh Hoover, 24 of 39 passes for 247 yards with a touchdown. It is 4 straight losses for the Cyclones. Iowa State defensively on the road in conference play, allowing 5.5 yards per rush, 9.4 yards per pass attempt. Offensively on the road in the Big 12, they struggle with pass efficiency. TCU at home in the Big 12 has averaged 39 points per game with 4 yards per rush with good quarterback play. On defense in conference play at home, they're allowing 3.4 yards per rush and 53% completion rate. Horned Frogs 3-1 the spread as home favorite at 3.5 to 10 points. Pick here TCU minus 6.5. Texas A&M and Missouri. This one for Saturday. Texas A&M now 8-0 after a 49-25 road win at LSU. The Aggies had good work in the passing game and rushed for 224 yards for 5.6 yards a carry. They limited the Tigers to 2.5 yards per rush with 218 yards passing for 5.6 yards per pass attempt. Marcel Reed in the game, 12 of 21 passing for 202 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. He rushed for 108 yards and 2 touchdowns. Missouri sits here at 6-2 with their 17-10 road defeat here to Vanderbilt. That was 2 weeks ago. In that game, the Tigers were inefficient through the air and rushed for 170 yards for 4.1 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Commodores and allowed 136 yards rushing for 5.2 yards a carry. Matt Zollers here, 14-23 passing for 138 yards and a touchdown. 2 of the Aggies' 3 road wins have come by 2 or fewer points. Texas A&M on the road in conference play, allowing 34 points per game with 5.6 yards per rush. Missouri at home in the SEC has rushed for 5.9 yards a carry. And on defense, allowing 1.8 yards per rush. Texas A&M 0-6 to the spread on the road, facing teams that average 5.9 yards per play. Missouri 5-1 to the spread at home. Bonner road game. Pick here Missouri here at +7. And Iowa, of course, this one here will be played on Saturday afternoon. All right, taking a look here at Oregon coming into this one. 7-1 after a 21-7 home victory against Wisconsin. Ducks were limited through the air and rushed for 203 yards for 4.5 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Badgers to 86 passing yards with 110 rushing for 3.8 yards a carry. Dante Morton just 9 of 15 for 86 yards. Iowa 6-2 after a 41-3 home victory against Minnesota. The Hawkeyes were limited through the air and rushed for 133 yards for 3.7 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Golden Gophers to 133 yards with great work against the run and pass. Mark Winahowski here, 12 of 19 passes for 135 yards with a touchdown. The Hawkeyes were competitive at home against Indiana. Iowa defensively at home in conference, allowing 2.7 yards per rush with 5.5 yards per pass attempt. They rushed for 4.7 yards a carry at home against the Big Ten. The Hawkeyes, while 7-3 the spread at home against the Big Ten, will take Iowa here at +6.5. Kansas and Arizona going off here on Saturday. Kansas now 5-4 with a 38-21 home victory against Oklahoma State. Jayhawks had a poor passing performance in the game, rushed for 232 yards for nearly 6 yards a carry. Defensively, they limited the Cowboys to 2.3 yards per rush, 244 yards passing for nearly 8 yards per pass attempt. Jalen Daniels here, 13 of 19 for 110 yards with 2 touchdowns. Arizona is 5-3 after a 52-17 road win at Colorado. The Wildcats gained 417 yards with really good work in the run and pass. They limited the Buffs' passing game and allowed 129 yards rushing for 3.1 yards a carry. Noah Fafita here, 11 of 19 passing for 213 yards and 4 touchdowns. Kansas on the road rushing for 2.3 yards a carry and allowing 277 yards rushing for 6.6 yards per carry. Arizona at home is passing for 261 yards with over 7 yards per pass attempt. On defense at home in conference, they hold quarterbacks at 59% completion rate. Kansas has failed to cover 3 straight. We'll take Arizona here, minus 4.5. Syracuse and Miami for Saturday. Syracuse fell to 3-6 after their 27-10 home defeat to North Carolina. The Orange had really poor passing performance and rushed for 108 yards for 3.4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 4.9 yards a carry with 216 yards passing for 11.5 yards per pass attempt. Joseph Filardi, 4 of 18 passing for 39 yards. Miami dropping to 6-2, a 26-20 road defeat to SMU. Hurricanes had good movement in the passing game and rushed for 159 yards for 3.9 yards a carry. They limited the Mustangs to 23 rushing yards and 365 yards passing for 8.1 yards per pass attempt. Carson Beck here, 26 of 38 passing for 274 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Syracuse has struggled to find a capable backup after losing Angeli for the year. They look to a true freshman Filardi here who was way down the depth chart. Orange has gotten really poor quarterback play. Of course, since the change, since the injury, as we said to Angeli, the Orange on the road in conference allowing 72% completion rate with 329 yards passing per game. Miami at home in conference throwing for 238 yards per game, 72% completion rate. The Orange has failed to cover 4 straight. We'll take Miami here, minus 28.5. Iowa State and TCU going off here on Saturday. Iowa State now 5-4 after a 24-19 home defeat to Arizona State. The Cyclones were inefficient in the passing game and rushed for 150 yards for 4.7 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Sun Devils through the air but surrendered 290 yards rushing for 6.3 yards per carry. Rocco Beck here, 18 of 36 passing for 186 yards with a touchdown and pick. TCU now 6-2 with a 23-17 road win at West Virginia. The Horned Frogs had movement in the passing game and rushed for 96 yards for 2.9 yards a carry. They limited the Mountaineers to 41 rushing yards with 301 yards passing for 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Josh Hoover in the game, 24 of 39 passing for 247 yards and a touchdown. Iowa State dropped both road games in Big 12 play. Their defense on the road in conference allowing 5.1 yards per rush with 247 yards passing for 9.4 yards per pass attempt. TCU at home in conference completing 70% of their passes for nearly 8 yards per pass attempt and defends the run well. They hold opposing quarterbacks at home to 53% completion rate. Pick here TCU minus 7. Duke and UConn going off on Saturday. At Duke now 5-3 with their 46-45 road win at Clemson. That was a wild game there. The Blue Devils rushed for 3.5 yards a carry and effective in the passing game. They allowed nearly 5 yards per rush to the Tigers with 385 yards passing for 10.7 yards per pass attempt. Darren Mensah here, 27 of 41 passing for 361 yards with 4 touchdowns. UConn now 6-3, a 38-19 home victory against UAB. The Huskies had good performance in the passing game and rushed for 107 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush with 218 passing yards for 6 yards per pass attempt. Joe Fagnano, 23 of 30 passing for 267 yards and 4 touchdowns. It's back-to-back road games for the Blue Devils. They have won and covered 3 straight on the road. UConn has won all 4 home games. The Blue Devils on the road allowing 282 yards passing for 8.7 yards per pass attempt. They put up 39 points per game on the road with good offensive numbers. UConn at home averaging 45 points per game with 71% completion rate for 9.2 yards per pass attempt. The Blue Devils 10-5 the over on the road. Pick here Duke and UConn over 65.5. Auburn and Vanderbilt going off here on Saturday. Auburn fell to 4-5 after their 10-3 home defeat to Kentucky. The Tigers had a poor passing performance and rushed for 118 yards for 3 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Wildcats to 2.5 yards per rush with 161 yards passing for 5.5 yards per pass attempt. Ashton Daniels here, 13-28 passing for 108 yards with a pick. He rushed for 48 yards in the game. Vanderbilt drops to 7-2, a 34-31 road defeat to Texas. The Commodores had really good passing performance but rushed for only 58 yards. On defense, they held the Longhorns to 3.7 yards a carry with 328 yards passing for 9.9 yards per pass attempt. Diego Pavia hit 27-38 passing for 365 yards with 3 touchdowns. He rushed for 43 yards and a score. Vanderbilt has won all 2 home games in conference. Auburn dropped 2 of 3 on the road against the SEC. The Tigers on the road in conference rushing for only 3.2 yards a carry with poor quarterback play. They allowed 9.3 yards per pass attempt against the SEC on the road. Vanderbilt at home against the SEC allowing 17 points per game with 6.6 yards per pass attempt. They're rushing for 5.3 yards a carry and averaging 7 yards per pass attempt at home against the conference. Pick here, Vandy here, minus 6.5. Kennesaw State and New Mexico State going off on Saturday. New Mexico State here hosting. We got Kennesaw State now 6-2 after a 33-20 home victory against UTEP. The Owls were inefficient through the air and rushed for 150 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 3 yards per rush with 160 yards passing for 5.3 yards per pass attempt. Amari Odom in the game, 6 of 10 passing for 86 yards. New Mexico State now 3-5 after a 35-16 road defeat to Western Kentucky. The Aggies had a poor passing game, rushed for 2.4 yards a carry. They allowed 3.4 yards per rush to the Hilltoppers with 301 yards passing for 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Logan 5 here, 13 of 39 passing for 110 yards and a pick. Kennesaw State in their lone road conference game beat FIU 45-26. New Mexico State 1-1 at home in Conference USA with a 7-point loss to Missouri State. Kennesaw State against a conference rush for 4.8 yards a carry and getting good quarterback play. They defend the pass well in Conference USA play. Mexico State in conference rushed for 3.1 yards a carry and getting inaccurate quarterback play. Their pass defense has been poor against Conference USA. Pick here, Kennesaw State minus 9.5. Georgia State and Coastal Carolina. This one for Saturday. We got Georgia State now 1-7 after a 38-31 home defeat to South Alabama. The Panthers had movement in the passing game and rushed for 199 yards for 5.4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 468 yards to the Jaguars by poorly defending the run and pass. Cameron Brown here, 19-33 passing for 241 yards with 4 touchdowns and a pick. Coastal Carolina now 5-3, a 44-27 home victory against Marshall. Chanticleers were efficient through the air and rushed for 214 yards for 4.8 yards a carry. Defensively, they defended the pass well and allowed 279 yards rushing for 6.2 yards a carry. Samari Collier here, 8 of 20 passing for 196 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 75 yards and 2 scores. We got Coastal Carolina here 2-0 at home against the Sun Belt, winning both games by wide margin. Georgia State 0-4 facing the Sun Belt, losing their road game by 17. Georgia State on the road allowing 6.5 yards a carry with 9.9 yards per pass attempt and have been inefficient in the passing game. The Chanticleers at home in the Sun Belt rushing for 5.2 yards a carry and throwing for 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Panthers 5-8 to the spread as an underdog. Pick here, Coastal Carolina here, minus 7.5. Stanford and North Carolina for Saturday. Stanford now 3-6 after a 35-20 home defeat to Pittsburgh. The Cardinal rushed for only 10 yards and had movement in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 466 yards to the Panthers by poorly defending the run and pass. Elijah Brown here 10 of 14 passing for 108 yards with a touchdown. North Carolina 3-5 after their 27-10 road win at Syracuse. The Tar Heels were efficient through the air and rushed for 209 yards for 4.9 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Orange to 39 passing yards with 108 yards rushing for 3.4 yards a carry. Gio Lopez, 15 of 19 passing for 216 yards and 2 touchdowns. Stanford benched their starting quarterback and goes with a redshirt freshman in Brown here. The Cardinal in their 3 road games have lost all 3 by 24 or greater points. North Carolina is showing improvement defensively and got good performance at quarterback last week. Pick here North Carolina minus 7.5. Washington and Wisconsin for Saturday. We got Washington here 6-2 after a 42-25 home victory against Illinois. The Huskies gained 449 yards with effective rushing and passing. They limited the Illini through the air and allowed 138 yards rushing for 4.8 yards a carry. Desmond Williams here 26 for 33 passing for 280 yards with 4 touchdowns. He rushed for 66 yards in the game. Wisconsin dropping to 2-6 after a 21-7 road defeat to Oregon. The Badgers were horrible through the air and rushed for 110 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Ducks through the air and allowed 203 yards rushing for 4.5 yards a carry. Hunter Simons here 7 of 21 passing for 86 yards, a touchdown and a pick. Wisconsin has struggled at quarterback after the injury to Billy Edwards. It is 6 straight losses here. Washington on the road in conference has averaged 15.5 points per game, with 2.6 yards per rush, 6.6 yards per pass attempt. Here, the Badgers have been held to 10 or fewer points in their past 5 games, going under in all of them. Pick here Washington and Wisconsin under 45. Here for Saturday. Texas State now 3-5 after their 52-20 home defeat to James Madison. Bobcats had movement in the passing game and rushed for 122 yards for 3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 511 yards to the Dukes with poor work against the run and pass. Brad Jackson here, 18 of 32 passes for 230 yards with a touchdown and 3 picks. He rushed for 43 yards in the score. Louisiana here, well, they're 3-6 with a 31-22 road win at South Alabama. The Raging Cajuns had a really good passing performance and rushed for 161 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 4.6 yards per rush to the Jaguars with 203 yards passing for 6.2 yards per pass attempt. Lunch Winfield, 14 of 15 passing for 232 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 45 yards in the score. Texas State offensively in conference getting great work at quarterback and rushed for 4.1 yards a carry. On defense in conference, the pass defense has been poor. Louisiana at home in conference, while they're rushing for over 5 yards a carry and getting bad quarterback play, their defense at home in the Sun Belt allowing 4.4 yards per rush, 76% completion rate, 10.1 yards per pass attempt. Louisiana 6-11 to the spread at home. We'll take Texas State here minus 2.5. Air Force and San Jose State going off on Saturday. Air Force now 2-6 with their 20-17 home defeat to Army. The Falcons were effective in the passing game and rushed for 174 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. On defense, they held Army to 4.3 yards a carry and allowed 102 yards passing. Liam Zarka, 13 of 17 passing for 161 yards and 2 interceptions. San Jose State now 3-5 after a 45-38 home victory against Hawai'i. The Spartans were effective through the air and rushed for 172 yards for 6.1 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Warriors to 3.9 yards per rush with 401 yards passing for 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Walker Egan in the game, 20 of 40 passing for 458 yards and 2 touchdowns. San Jose State won both home games against the Mountain West. Air Force has dropped both road games in conference. Air Force on the road in conference putting up 39 points per game with 5.5 yards per rush, 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Defensively on the road in conference, allowing 6.7 yards per run, 332 yards passing for 12.1 yards per pass attempt. San Jose State at home putting up 40 points a game, allowing 33. Their passing game has been good at home in conference and defending the pass poorly. Falcons 3-0 to the over on the road. San Jose State 2-0 to the over at home in conference. Pick here Air Force and San Jose State over 67. California and Louisville for Saturday. California now 5-4 after a 31-21 home defeat to Virginia. The Golden Bears were held to 8 rushing yards with movement in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 4.4 yards a carry with 262 yards passing for 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Jaron Ko Sagapolotele, 19 of 30 passing for 213 yards and 2 interceptions. Louisville now 7-1 after a 28-16 road win at Virginia Tech. The Cardinals were limited here through the air and rushed for 235 yards for 6.9 yards per carry. Defensively, they held the Hokies to 76 yards passing with 164 yards rushing for 4.1 yards per carry. Miller Moss here, 19 of 28 passing for 136 yards with a touchdown and pick. California offensively on the road in conference passing for 279 yards per game, 7.3 yards per pass attempt. They have defended the pass on the road well against the ACC. Louisville 0-2 to the spread at home as a 14.5 to 21-point favorite. We'll take Cal here plus 18.5. Wake Forest and Virginia going off here on Saturday. Wake Forest now 5-3 after a 42-7 road defeat to Florida State. The Demon Deacons were limited to the air and rushed for 85 yards for 4.1 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 3.8 yards per rush to the Seminoles, with 271 yards passing for 16 yards per pass attempt. Robbie Ashford here, 12 of 21 passing for 93 yards and a pick. He rushed for 59 yards in the game. Virginia improved to 8-1 with a 31-21 road win at Cal. The Cavs had a good passing performance and rushed for 194 yards for 4.4 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Golden Bears to 8 rushing yards with 255 yards passing for 8 yards per pass attempt. Chandler Morris in the game, 24 of 26 passing for 262 yards. Virginia at home against the ACC, rushing for 4.8 yards a carry and throwing for 307 yards for 9 yards per pass attempt. Defensively, they allowed 272 yards passing for 8.8 yards per pass attempt. That's at home against the conference. Wake Forest on the road in conference play, rushing for just 2.5 yards a carry and getting inefficient play at the quarterback position. The Cavs 11-6 to the spread at home. We'll take Virginia here minus 6.5. Florida State and Clemson going off here on Saturday. Florida State now 4-4 after a 42-7 home victory against Wake Forest. The Seminoles had a good passing performance and rushed for 150 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. Defensively, they held the Demon Deacons to 4.1 yards a carry with 162 yards passing for 5.2 yards per carry. Tommy Castellanos here, 12-16 passing for 271 yards with a touchdown. Clemson fell to 3-5 after a 46-45 home defeat to Duke. The Tigers had a good passing game and rushed for 175 yards for 5 yards a carry. They limited Duke on the ground but allowed 361 yards passing for 8.6 yards to carry. Kate Klubnik in the game, 27-36 passing for 385 yards and 2 touchdowns. Clemson has lost all 4 home games against power conference schools. Florida State at home has lost both road games. FSU on the road has struggled with quarterback accuracy. Clemson at home is getting good quarterback play with 298 yards passing for 7.4 yards per pass attempt. They have defended the run well at home. We'll take Clemson here minus 1. Nevada and Utah State going off here on Saturday. Nevada fell to 1-7 with a 24-3 home defeat to Boise State. The Wolfpack were poor in the passing game and rushed for 101 yards for 4.4 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 2.8 yards per rush to the Broncos with 175 yards passing for 6.3 yards per pass attempt. Carter Jones here, 16-29 passing for 144 yards and 3 picks. Utah State now 4-4, a 33-14 road defeat at New Mexico. The Aggies rushed for 5.7 yards a carry with some movement in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 224 yards rushing for 5.3 yards a carry and 8.3 yards per pass attempt. Bryson Barnes, 13-23 passing for 164 yards with a touchdown and pick. Nevada has lost every game against FBS opponents. In conference play, they're averaging 13 points per game with poor work in the run and pass. Defensively, they're allowing 65% completion rate, 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Utah State at home is putting up 39 points per game with 5.3 yards per rush and 71% completion rate for 10.4 yards per pass attempt. The Aggies 6-1. The spread is home favorite. We'll take Utah State here minus 8. LSU and Alabama going off here on Saturday. LSU now 5-3 with a 49-25 home defeat to Texas A&M. The Tigers were poor on the ground and through the air. On defense, they allowed 224 yards rushing for 5.5 yards a carry and 9.6 yards per pass attempt. Garrett Nussmeier in the game, 22 of 35 passing for 168 yards with a touchdown. Alabama now 7-1, a 29-22 road win at South Carolina. The Crimson Tide rushed for 3 yards a carry and limited in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 3 yards per rush to the Gamecocks with 222 yards passing for 6.7 yards per pass attempt. Ty Simpson here, 24 of 43 passing for 253 yards with 2 touchdowns. Alabama at home against power conference schools have won all 3 games by 16 or greater points. LSU 0-2 on the road against the SEC. Their offense struggles on the ground on the road in the SEC, and on defense, giving up over 4.5 yards a carry with 7.8 yards per pass attempt. Alabama at home in conference play, throwing for 297 yards for nearly 10 yards per pass attempt, and they're defending the pass well. LSU 3-7 of the spread on the road against the SEC. Crimson Tide 13-4 of the spread as home favorite. We'll take Alabama here -10. Navy and Notre Dame going off on Saturday. And Navy 7-1 after a 31-17 road defeat at North Texas. The midshipmen rushed for 311 yards for 7 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 4.2 yards per carry with 234 yards passing for 9.8 yards per pass attempt. Blake Horvath, 8 of 14 passing for 80 yards and 2 interceptions. He rushed for 112 yards and a touchdown. Notre Dame 6-2 after a 25-10 road win at Boston College. Flying Irish had a great pass performance and rushed for 159 yards for 5.5 yards a carry. On defense, they held BC to 12 rushing yards for 269 yards passing for 6 yards per pass attempt. C.J. Carr, 18 of 25 passing for 299 yards with 2 touchdowns. It's back-to-back road games for midshipmen, and they're allowing 68% completion rate on the road for 8 yards per pass attempt. Notre Dame at home rushing for 5.5 yards a carry with 9.4 yards per pass attempt with great run defense. Fighting Irish has won by 28 or greater in 3 of their past 4 meetings against Navy. They have covered 5 of 6 against the midshipmen. We'll take Notre Dame here -26.5. Florida and Kentucky for Saturday night. Florida fell at 3-5 after a 24-20 home defeat to Georgia. The Gators were light in the passing game and rushed for 115 yards for 3.6 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 3.5 yards per rush to the Bulldogs with 223 yards passing for 7.7 yards per pass attempt. G.J. Lagway in the game, 15 of 24 passing for 168 yards with a touchdown. Kentucky 3-5 with a 10-3 road win at Auburn. The Wildcats were inefficient through the air and rushed for 79 yards for 2.5 yards a carry. Defensively, they shut down the Tigers' passing game, allowed 118 yards rushing for 3 yards a carry. Cutter Boley in the game, 18 of 29 passes for 161 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. We've got here Florida in conference play averaging 255 yards passing with 7.4 yards per pass attempt. Defensively against the SEC, they struggled defending the pass by giving up 8.7 yards per pass attempt. Kentucky in conference play has also struggled defending the pass, allowing 29 points per game, 8.6 yards per pass attempt. Wildcats have gone over in 5 of 7. Gators 9-3 the over on the road against the SEC. Pick here Florida, Kentucky over 44.5. Nebraska and UCLA for Saturday night. Nebraska 6-3 with their 21-17 home defeat to USC. The Cornhuskers had a poor passing performance and rushed for 188 yards for 4.7 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Trojans through the air and allowed 202 yards rush for 5.3 yards a carry. Starting quarterback Dylan Raiola is out for the year. TJ Lateef completed 5 of 7 in relief for 7 yards. UCLA 3-5 with a 56-6 road defeat to Indiana. The Bruins had a really poor passing performance, rushed for 88 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 475 yards to the Hoosiers with poor work against the run and pass. Nico Ayamaleva, 13 of 27 passing for 113 yards and 2 picks. Nebraska on the road is rushed for 3.9 yards a carry, and on defense allowing 4.9 yards per rush with 75% completion rate and 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Bruins at home rushing for 5 yards a carry with 62% completion rate. They have defended the pass well. Nebraska quarterback situation, the concern here, we'll take UCLA here to pick them. UNLV and Colorado State for Saturday night. We've got UNLV now 6-2 after a 40-35 home defeat to New Mexico. The Rebels had a good passing performance and rushed for 87 yards for 3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush with 401 yards passing for 15.4 yards per pass attempt. Anthony Calandria here, 36 of 46 passing for 382 yards with 3 touchdowns. Colorado State here 2-6 with a 28-0 road defeat to Wyoming. The Rams had some movement in the passing game and rushed for 94 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. On defense, they limited Wyoming through the air and allowed 212 yards rush for 6.2 yards a carry. Jacksonville here, 10 of 18 passing for 99 yards and 3 picks. Rebels have gone over in 4 of 5. UNLV on the road in conference play, giving up 6.7 yards per rush, 7.4 yards per pass attempt. There's another rusher for over 5 yards a carry away from home against the conference. Colorado State at home in conference put up 34 points per game, but allowing 325 yards passing for 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Pick here will be UNLV and Colorado State over 61.5. Sam Houston and Oregon State going off on Saturday night. We got here Sam Houston falling to 0-5 after falling here after their 55-14 road defeat at Louisiana Tech. The Bearcats, they're winless here. That's, I believe, 0-8, I believe. The Bearcats were inefficient through the air and rushed for 296 yards for 59 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 646 yards to the Bulldogs with poor work against the run and pass. Mabry and Matauer, 3 of 7 passing for 13 yards. Starter Hunter Watson was knocked out of the game with a knee injury last time out. Oregon State 2-7 with a 10-7 home victory against Washington State. The Beavers were poor in the passing game and rushed for 124 yards for 3 yards a carry. Defensively, they limited the Cougars through the air and rushed for 125 yards for 3.6 yards a carry. Gabory Johnson, 10 of 15 passing for 33 yards in the game. Oregon State has struggled at the quarterback position with efficiency. They have defended the pass well. Sam Houston has struggled at quarterback and on the road with lack of accuracy and inefficiency. They averaged 13.5 points per game at home. Pick here Sam Houston State and Oregon State under 52.5. San Diego State and Hawai'i going off here on Saturday nights. We got San Diego State 7-1 after a 24-7 home victory against Wyoming. The Aztecs were efficient in the passing game and rushed for 196 yards for 4.9 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Cowboys to 96 passing yards with 89 yards rushing, 2.5 yards a carry. Jaden Denico, 11 of 22 passing for 194 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. He played through an undisclosed injury last week. Hawaii fell to 6-3 with a 45-38 road defeat to San Jose State. The Warriors had a great passing game and rushed for 95 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 630 yards to the Spartans with poor work against the run and pass. Miguel Alejado, 31 of 46 passing for 367 yards and 3 touchdowns. San Diego State 2-0 on the road against the conference. Hawaii has a home loss to Fresno State. The Aztecs on the road in conference play putting up 34 points per game with 4.9 yards per rush and 8.9 yards per pass attempt. They defended well on the road, allowing 5 points per game against the Mountain West. Hawaii at home in conference play surrendering 4.5 yards per rush with 282 yards passing for 9.5 yards per pass attempt. The Aztecs have covered 6 straight. Pick here San Diego State here -7. For more free pick videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Lots of free picks on our channel for myself and our team of cabbers here at Tony'sPicks.com, making it a great channel to subscribe to. Hit us up with that thumbs up. We greatly appreciate that. And then visit our site, Tony'sPicks.com. That's where you're going to find our best bets, our premium plays for this big card coming up from college football. And, of course, our best bets and more. So get signed up. And our promo code TonyT at checkout will knock off that 15%. The link's in the description to get signed up. That will do it for now. I'm Tony T. We'll talk to you later.